I didn't just expose my boyfriend's pretentious friend as a fraud, I ended her academic career for trying to call me too dumb to date him. For 2 years, my boyfriend Nathan and I had an easy, perfect rhythm. We were both aerospace engineers, I designed satellite components, he did consulting, and we genuinely loved talking about our projects and helping each other solve problems. We met at trivia night, and our intellectual chemistry was just as good as everything else. But that was before Melissa. Melissa was Nathan's high school friend, now getting her PhD in theoretical physics, and she immediately started joining our hangouts. At first, I tried to be friendly, asking genuine questions about quantum mechanics. But she would answer like she was explaining to a 5-year-old, then turn to Nathan and say, "Wasn't it cute how I tried to understand?" She only did this when Nathan was watching. She'd steer dinner conversations to her smart people stuff, then apologize for boring me. She didn't know I have 2 master's degrees. The breaking point came after a trivia night. I answered every space exploration question correctly because, as I reminded myself, it's literally my job. Melissa told Nathan I must have just memorized facts without understanding the underlying concepts. To my horror, Nathan agreed and suggested we give other teams a chance. The undermining continued. Nathan, who had never questioned my competence before, started asking if I really knew what I was doing when I fixed our router or if I just got lucky. When I helped optimize his project code, he double-checked it with Melissa, and she falsely told him there were errors. The final straw was at his company party. I was talking to his boss about propulsion systems when Melissa interrupted and told the boss I was just Nathan's girlfriend who works as a lab tech. When the boss mentioned he thought I was the engineer who published a paper on thermal management, Melissa laughed and said that must be someone else, because the math was pretty advanced. She then physically moved Nathan away. In the car home, Nathan said Melissa was worried about our compatibility, that relationships need intellectual equals, and maybe I'd be happier with someone at my own level. I asked what that level was. He repeated Melissa's point that he struggled with abstract concepts and relied too much on practical application, and this woman had convinced him I was too dumb for him. He admitted she had made valid points about our conversations being surface level, despite us having discussed the philosophical implications of sending consciousness to Mars the previous week. I knew exactly what was happening, so I decided to play the long game. I started acting confused when Nathan explained things, and bought pop science books to leave around. Melissa ate it up, calling me Nathan's sweet, simple girlfriend. Meanwhile, I started working on my revenge. Melissa's PhD advisor was Dr. Harrison, who I had actually collaborated with on 3 papers. I reached out to him about a new project involving quantum applications in satellite navigation, which was just an excuse to start working together. Soon, Dr. Harrison was sending me Melissa's research to review since my practical experience could strengthen her theoretical work. I immediately saw her research was derivative, repackaged with complex math to obscure rather than illuminate. Her code was inefficient, and her conclusions ignored real-world variables. I wrote a thorough review pointing out every flaw. Then, I found something worse, whole paragraphs lifted without attribution from obscure Russian papers, enough to end a career. I documented all 17 instances across 4 papers, and sent it to Dr. Harrison with deep concerns about academic integrity. The review board met that week. Melissa, thinking it was about her defense, was instead presented with my findings. Her funding was pulled immediately, and she had 2 weeks to clean out her office. Nathan called me, panicking that Melissa was having a breakdown, saying someone sabotaged her. She couldn't figure out who. Nathan asked me, despite everything, if I could help. I said, of course, and went over with cookies and tea. I found her hunched over her desk in her tiny, messy office. She kept crying, saying the plagiarism was impossible and she'd been set up. I nodded and made sympathetic sounds, fighting to keep my face concerned instead of satisfied. This was exactly what I had planned. She asked me to look at the review board's findings, the document I had written myself. I pretended to read it for the first time and told her it looked pretty thorough. While she was still crying, Nathan texted, asking if Melissa had said anything about who might have reported her. The cold realization hit me, he had no idea I had destroyed his friend's career. I typed back that she was too upset to talk coherently and suggested he give her space. She then looked up and asked if I thought Nathan would still want to be friends with her after this. I told her of course he would, the hollow words giving her comfort. When I finally left, she hugged me and told me I was a good friend. The next week, Nathan kept texting me updates about Melissa, worried and checking his phone. He wondered if he should have seen the signs that something was wrong with her research. I bit my tongue and reassured him that he couldn't have known. I sat there, pretending to be equally concerned, while feeling a weird mix of triumph and guilt, the guilt surprising me. The truth hit me hardest when my coworker, Kara, asked if everything was okay with Nathan. I realized I had been so focused on destroying Melissa that I hadn't processed what it meant that Nathan had so easily, so quickly, believed her over me. 2 years of knowing me meant nothing compared to a few weeks of her comments. I told Kara things were complicated. That night, Nathan came over, paused our documentary, and brought up Melissa's comments about our intellectual compatibility. My stomach dropped. He started saying he wondered if he had been unfair to me. He suggested the things Melissa had pointed out weren't actually true, and maybe he had just been seeing what she wanted him to see. The anger rose in my chest. He was only questioning his behavior now because his source of information was gone. I asked if he actually believed I struggled with abstract concepts. He hesitated, saying Melissa had been convincing. I set my food down. I asked if our conversation about consciousness and Mars had seemed surface level before Melissa told him it was. He admitted it hadn't. Standing by the window, the decision fully formed in my mind. I turned and calmly told him everything. How I reviewed Melissa's research for Dr. Harrison, found the plagiarism from the Russian papers, documented every instance, and wrote the review that led to her getting kicked out. Nathan's face went completely white. He stared at me like I had committed murder. When he finally asked why I would do something so destructive, I walked back and sat down, listing every time he had questioned my intelligence based on her lies. The router incident, checking my code with Melissa, the company party, the car ride home where he'd suggested I find someone at my own level. He tried to defend himself, saying Melissa was convincing and had a PhD. I cut him off. I asked if my 2 master's degrees, my published papers, and 6 years as an aerospace engineer weren't authority enough. I asked if he needed Melissa to tell him I was smart, or if he should have figured that out from dating me for 2 years. The hurt on his face was obvious, and he finally realized the depth of his mistake. But then he asked if the plagiarism was real, or if I had made it up to destroy her. I was genuinely offended he was still doubting my professional integrity. I pulled up my laptop and showed him the original Russian papers side by side with Melissa's work, pointing out the identical paragraphs, and lifted equations across all 4 papers. He realized her fraud was completely real, that I hadn't fabricated anything. We talked for 3 hours. Nathan apologized repeatedly, admitting his own insecurity about not having a PhD had made him vulnerable to Melissa, who played right into his fear and made him feel included in an intellectual elite by agreeing with her assessment of me. I listened, trying to figure out if I could forgive someone so easily convinced of my incompetence. I told him I needed time to process everything. The next evening, Nathan showed up at my door with 2 boxes. He had packed his things from my apartment without me asking. After he left, the apartment felt more like mine, like I had room to breathe again. 2 weeks later, I got an email that made my stomach drop. The subject line, "I know it was you." It was from Melissa. Her email wasn't angry, it was defeated. She had figured out I was the reviewer. But what surprised me most was her acceptance. She acknowledged the plagiarism was real and admitted she had gotten sloppy, taking shortcuts, because she was behind. She ended by saying she didn't blame me for reporting it because it was the truth. I forwarded the email to Nathan. He called me within 10 minutes, his voice shaking. He apologized again, finally understanding the full extent of Melissa's manipulation and dishonesty. When he asked if I would try couples counseling, I was surprised, but I agreed because I still wasn't ready to completely give up on us. We started therapy, and the counselor helped us identify patterns. Nathan's insecurity had led him to overvalue theoretical credentials and undervalue practical expertise, making him vulnerable to Melissa. She also pointed out my own fault, choosing calculated revenge instead of confronting the problem directly. We both had work to do on communication and trust. 3 months later, things were better, but different. We were more honest, talking about our feelings instead of letting resentment build. But a new carefulness was there, like we were both constantly watching for the other person to doubt or plan something again. We were building something more honest, but it took more work. Then, my boss called me in and promoted me to senior engineer, leading my own team. My technical contributions had been outstanding. That night, I told Nathan, and he celebrated me, telling everyone at our celebration dinner about my research and technical expertise. It felt like a test we were passing. A few weeks later, Kara told me Melissa had completely withdrawn from the PhD program and moved back to Ohio to work in her family's commercial real estate business. Hearing this, I felt a complicated knot in my stomach. Part of me was satisfied, she had faced consequences for her fraud and sabotage. But another part was deeply uncomfortable with the severity of her downfall. Nathan and I talked about it. He understood why I did what I did, but also acknowledged my conflict. We decided to stay together and keep going to therapy. We both had changed. I knew I was capable of calculated revenge. Nathan knew he was capable of betraying someone he loved through weakness. We were building something more real, harder work, but more solid, choosing each other despite our flaws.